Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I was struck by your story in learning about the household that you grew up in. And can you tell me a bit about how you came to environmentalism as a concept and as a practice?
Well, I was born into it. There's, a term, an environmental nepo baby, and that is definitely what I am. I got the privilege of growing up in a house that ran on solar, so it was, connected to the grid because you legally have to be. But we had our own battery backup. We had a few kilowatts of solar on the roof, and from the earliest age, when I was old enough to pull a chair to the back workbench, my dad would call me in the middle of the day and be like, "All right, switch over to the grid," and I would get, you know up on the workbench and switch from our solar to the grid every night. And, that was kind of normal to me. My dad drove an electric car long before Tesla was available. And it was interesting to a lot of people. I mean, every school I went to took a tour of my house at some point because he had retrofitted this little two-bedroom bungalow in Studio City to be this kind of environmental oasis. We had our own garden that we grew every single year. We had our own composting, our own recycled rainwater, our, own solar, and I kind of grew up with that as normal. It was not something that I think a lot of people would see that as strange. My dad taught me at a very early age the transportation hierarchy, which is a term that he coined, where if you can get somewhere walking, you should walk there. If you can't walk there, if you could try to bike there, bike there. If you can't bike there, then take public transportation. If you can't take public transportation, then we get to take the electric car. So it was so many steps to even get to an electric car, which is even the most green form of transportation that most people take. And he instilled in me a real connection with nature that, I feel so privileged to have, because it is something that I feel is so essential for, our planet, us having a connection with nature, us understanding our symbiotic relationship. And so, yes, it was unusual probably to most people's standards, but to me, it was incredibly common and just normal.
And what drove your parents towards that position?
Gosh, my dad is a very special person. He, in 1970, with the first Earth Day, saw the smog in LA. He saw, the pollution, a river caught on fire in Ohio, I think. Yeah, a river caught on fire, and he was like, "A river cannot catch on fire. We have to do something about this." Before they had even discovered that climate change was happening, he just wanted to clean up the air in Los Angeles. And he's the kind of person, and I think this is, kind of more towards his character, that if there's an issue, he takes personal responsibility to change it. So he saw a common threat for all of us, clean air, being under threat, clean water being under threat, and he decided to take it upon himself to make a change and make hard choices. He began composting when he lived in an apartment, in Van Nuys. He began riding his bike wherever he could, to save energy and save, pollution, just because he wanted to do his part. So there was this, feeling of, owing that to his community that he took upon himself, and very admirable. And as we began to know more about climate change and, how that affects our planet, he became more and more active in environmental communities, and yeah, it just kind of became his lifestyle.
Yeah, very special person.
Yeah,
Really, really inspiring.
thank you.
I am really curious about you as a member of the Gen Z generation,
Yes.
and I'd love to hear about how you use social media to communicate this message.
Yeah, it's something that I never planned on doing. I've always had social media. I've had I had a Facebook. I no longer have Facebook, but I had a Instagram since I was 11. So it was something that I, incorporated as part of my like daily life since middle school. And I always only started to post things I thought were funny or interesting. And, when I was posting on Instagram, with the way the algorithm works, only my friends would see it. But then suddenly when I started posting on TikTok, I started to get a following. Pretty much what felt like to me out of nowhere. Now, looking back, I had a pretty interesting life, and some of the things I would post about that were just kind of normal to me were kind of funny or interesting. And at a certain point back in 2023, I decided, I have this following that I never really meant to acquire. I should probably start to do something with it that's positive. And so I begged my mother for the third time to allow me to take her place at the Oscars with my dad if I could document it for TikTok as a series about public transportation. And she agreed, she acquiesced. And I did a series of 7 days, taking only public transportation in Los Angeles, which, if you're listening from New York, seems like, why would you have to document that? That seems pretty normal. But in
I think in
Los
North
Angeles.
Texas, we could relate to that
Yeah.
challenge.
Yes. It's super challenging in Los Angeles. The infrastructure is not built for that, and kind of purposely so. They dismantled the trolley system that was the largest public transportation system in the world in the 1940s. Very few people know that Los Angeles was the hub for public transit in the 1940s, and studio heads and the heads of car companies came in and wanted to make LA a car city so that they would be able to sell more cars, have Hollywood stars and cars to try and sell their vehicles. And so eventually there was less interest in public transportation and it began to be discontinued. And my dad, at a very early age, had a really strong emphasis on public transportation as a climate solution. And so I thought this will be something I can contribute. And of course, it went viral. And I was very lucky to be on like Now This and BuzzFeed and the New York Times and people covering it because it was, from many angles, an interesting story. And it's kind of indicative of my life. I grew up in this Hollywood family. My dad's father was an actor. He grew up in Hollywood himself. But I also grew up in a two-bedroom, one and a half bath bungalow in Studio City. I didn't grow up in Beverly Hills. I didn't have fancy clothes. So, our biggest treasure was our compost pit and our, backyard being filled with corn every summer. So I have that, dichotomy of this very glitzy life, but also very humble home life. And public transportation, I think, to a lot of people seems like something you only take if you have to. But I kind of want to make it something that is elective. There are ways you can take it, especially in LA, that it becomes convenient. And as we expand as a city, we can't really expand our freeways anymore than we already have. And there's a lot of people there that need to get around. So I actually ended up working for Metro shortly after I posted that series. I worked for the incredible CEO of Metro, Stephanie Wiggins, who is probably the most amazing and competent person to be in charge of that agency. I miss her every day. Hi, Stephanie. And I began to learn a lot about public transportation, and I still carry that with me, and I'm still an advocate for it. So yeah, that's kind of how, to make a long story short, my social media kind of took off from that, and I began to post more stuff about the environment. And it's kind of just been as I've gone along. Never really sought out to do anything or acquire an audience, but I've been lucky that I have.
What do you say to folks who feel really overwhelmed by the prospect of the implications of climate change and sort of um, task we have to remedy that? What do you say to people who feel just full of despair about it?
I think that's incredibly normal to feel despair about climate change because it's kind of this unusual, amorphous, cloud of symptoms, really. I mean, we're causing symptoms on the earth, and it's kind of like we have a disease or a condition that we're putting upon the earth where there's, a lot more hurricanes, there's a lot more droughts, there are bigger and stronger, tornadoes, things like that are occurring at a much higher rate. And so a lot of these issues will be localized, and you'll hear a story about a incredibly destructive hurricane in one area, and if you don't live there, it's like, oh, I'm sorry for those people, but there's always been hurricanes, and you kind of can shrug it off. But eventually these symptoms will creep up. No matter where you live, there will be issues, and I think people have that awareness and know that, but there is this kind of cognitive dissonance for most people, and for those that deeply care, a real sense of dread. And it's understandable, think that we have caused, you know, a certain amount of destruction. I think the thing that we should be hopeful about is there's events like what I'm here participating in called EarthX that is a bipartisan meeting of people across, government, private sector, Hollywood or, media, and trying to come together for a solution. As of right now, we cannot get off fossil fuels tomorrow, but we can start taking action to improve our energy independence, our energy innovation. And when you frame it like that, I think a lot of people feel more motivated than dreadful because it becomes this thing of, oh, this is a new chapter in our energy in America. Um, you know, yes, we are still going to have effects of climate change, even if we did stop what we were doing tomorrow. But the best way we can try to mitigate that, we have a lot of people working on it, and I think that there's some hope to have. Yes, we take step back, but, one step forward, two steps back it seems with each administration that comes in that wants to try and deny it, but it's very hard to deny people who have lost their homes to a hurricane that comes supposed to come once in a generation, becomes every 9 months now. So, I think we a lot of us who really do care do feel dread, but I'm hopeful that there will be innovations that take place that can give us a lot to hope about.
I listened to a TED Talk that you gave, and you said, quote, "Personal responsibility has been weaponized to blame the consumer." Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, I think, I grew up in a household that was my father's activism was centered around personal responsibility. So it's interesting when I began when I got older and I began to see other activist spaces, that was kind of frowned upon. Just this emphasis on personal responsibility, even though a lot of the people who would say
Your
this.
dad maybe had a different definition of personal
Yes.
responsibility.
Yes, exactly. And I think the big, negative, connotation with personal responsibility is that, people who are less likely to even be contributing to this issue are the ones typically taking on the responsibility, and that is very true, and there's an unequal, distribution of these effects. I think, especially in regards to, plastic pollution or climate change, it is very difficult for us to each be making the kind of choices that we need to be making every day to affect change. That is true. I can, get solar on my house, but if I order from a delivery service that, has 2-day shipping that I won't name, um, every single day and I'm getting something from the port, I'm just putting the pollution over there. The people who are suffering the health effects from, the smog or, suffering the heat island effects of the areas that are not near me, they're going to have to deal with that. So I think it's very difficult for us to try and make choices that actually, um, in this kind of consumer centered culture that are align with our ideas, and our morals. I think also for there's evidence of this. Coca-Cola was the one who started the recycling campaign in the 70s because they knew that they were creating this, plastic problem. And instead of being like, oh, that's our bad, it's now your fault if you don't recycle it. Now, how much of things even going into the recycling bin get recycled? A very small amount. And what do you even do with that recycled material? That's a bigger question, as we know that plastics are coated with a lot of chemicals that are harmful for us. We don't really want to be reusing it. It actually increases the amount of endocrine disrupting chemicals and, forever chemicals and whatnot. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I say there's been weaponization of our personal responsibility, but my overall thesis is what else are we going to do? We vote every single day vote every 4 years at a ballot box, hopefully every two. Hopefully sometimes if it's a local election every year. Um, but we vote every single day with our wallet, every single day with our dollar. So I think as much as it is difficult, and especially for people who don't have the means to make smart choices, quote unquote, choices by buying small businesses that, hand make things or things that are local, we can try and we can try to reduce what it is we need. My dad discovered that. I mean, I grew up in a house that was very small and he had, I think like 10 pairs of shorts and that were from Costco and some white t-shirts and blue shirts. That was what he wore every single day because he just lived very simply because he realized this about our culture that we think we need a lot more than we actually do. And I think that's kind of the solution with this personal responsibility problem.
What are you most optimistic about?
I'm hopeful that there are new technologies coming online every single day. I think that there is new batteries that are, becoming available. I'm very actually excited about sodium batteries. If there's anybody who works in sodium batteries, I'm very interested in actually getting in touch. That's part of my reason also wanting to go to EarthX. I'm like, is anyone here work with sodium batteries?
And what is a sodium battery and what makes it unique?
Our current batteries are lithium ion. Before that, there was nickel metal hydride and lead acid. I grew up with lead acid batteries. So when I was switching over to the grid as a kid, and I had my battery sorted, so that batteries stored there, they you know are stored with lead and acid. Lead acid, whatever the combination is. Not a chemist. That was pretty. The amount of energy that you could actually store in such a big battery was quite small compared to how much you can now store in a lithium ion. Lithium ion powers most electric cars nowadays, except in Asia, where there is a huge market for sodium batteries. And the appeal of sodium batteries is that it is less ecologically taxing to mine for sodium than it is for cobalt and lithium, as many people rightfully, uh, talk about is, what is a term? Tear down lithium batteries because they're incredibly ecologically taxing and the human cost of lithium and cobalt mining is extensive and throughout places that do not deserve to be impacted by such industry. This is an alternative to that. Sodium is readily available. It's less ecologically taxing to mine for. It apparently, allegedly, in some situations, can hold more power in the ions, and it charges faster, allegedly, in some instances. So I'm actually very excited about sodium batteries, of all things. It sounds so nerdy. Um, but I think that having something that's cheaper, easier to make, and charges faster is really what's going to propel us forward because we need somewhere to store this energy. The sun doesn't, stay around all day. And if we have solar, like I do, what are you not going to have power at night? No, you want to store it in a battery so that you can use it at night and then regenerate the next day. So I think, solutions like that are what gives me hope.
And when the story gets written about how Gen Z has impacted this environmentalist effort, what do you hope the tone of that story to be?
I would hope that we come at it from the what I have seen as being part of that generation, which is this level of fearlessness and determination. I know that Gen Z will sometimes get framed as being, like every generation when they're young, lazy, or unable to, have an attention span or things like that. I think the truth is we've been, bombarded by all different types of media, all different types of disinformation, and we're becoming disillusioned by it. And I think that our discernment is actually being refined. And even in this age of AI and what we not knowing what we see to be real or not, I think we are coming at the world with a level of scrutiny that is necessary for the next chapter. And with that scrutiny, I think will come quite a bit of fearlessness. I think we will be determined in what we do. I know I am. I feel very determined in what I do. I'm a very passionate person. I think a lot of the time our, um, you know, feelings of heartbreak about the situation we've been given is seen as being, you know, uh, uh, apathetic almost. But I think it's actually quite the contrary. I think we care so much that we are discarding what is not necessary. So that's what I think.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.